Breaking news just hours ago, Mexico reported that a former senior police official has been placed under house arrest as part of an organized crime investigation. Now, this comes just a few days after a mysterious plane crash killed the interior minister and a top intel officer, and 2 weeks after Mexico City's police chief resigned amid reports he, too, was tied to the nation's drug lords. Just allegations as of now. Now, these are all signs that Barack Obama's first international test may not come from a country far away, but from one with which we share a 2,000-mile border. The breakdown in law and order in Mexico is perhaps the most underreported story around, but we have the man who has been on top of the story at no small risk to his own life. As founder and publisher of Mexico's largest daily newspaper, Alejandro Junco has been fighting corruption in Mexico for years. His battle with the drug cartels has become so intense that he has now moved his family out of the country. I spoke to him just a short time ago from his second home in Austin, Texas. How will Mexico challenge the new President Obama?
Well, David, it's a paradox of American foreign policy that at great human and material cost, the U.S. is attempting to make viable some very faraway countries and is ignoring conditions that could cause a failed state next door.
What kind of conditions could actually cause a failed state for a country the size of Mexico?
Well, David, the economic growth, the combat of poverty, the job creation in Mexico has turned in the last decade from dismal to very worrisome. Basically, the Washington consensus that was whose policies were put into effect in the 90s and then coincided with the onset of Mexico's democracy have not worked as they were planned.
Well, what is the Mexican government doing wrong? Why can't they create jobs?
Well, the macroeconomic settings that were put in place, the privatization, the opening of markets, the deregulation, and the macroeconomic settings that were applied as a result of the policy spawned in the Washington consensus, they have been necessary but not sufficient. And today the debate is not whether the Washington consensus is dead or alive, but over what will replace it.
Well, let's talk about the most obvious example, the thing that we see from the United States most directly that is the problem with Mexico right now, which is the drug violence that's taking place. It seems to be literally taking over parts of Mexico. Are we exaggerating the degree to which that drug violence is a problem in Mexico?
No, I believe it has not even been fairly evaluated. We have a very serious problem with the infiltration of organized crime in the elected government. For example, last month, the mayor of Ixtapan de la Sal, Mr. Vergara, was murdered, and his stand-in replacement refused to accept the position because of the risk of dealing with the drug cartels. So we have the problem of that infiltration of government by organized crime. Then we have the problem of feudalization. There are geographic areas of the country that are essentially being controlled by the drug cartels, and they have created feuds. And basically a gradual breakdown of the rule of law. We have an elected government, both at the municipal, state, and federal levels, that are incapable of applying rules, that are incapable of offering personal security, that are incapable of guaranteeing property rights. So we have three very serious conditions that on top of a very dismal economic performance.
Well, Alejandro, I've known you for years. You're not one to exaggerate. You're a very responsible journalist, but what you're describing is a real crisis in Mexico that I don't think Americans in the United States are really aware of.
Unfortunately, that is the case. And I follow the presidential campaign, and I never heard this conditions being described.
Not one word.
All.
I agree with you 100. I have not heard one word on the campaign trail, which I followed pretty closely for the past couple of years, about Mexico, about the conditions in Mexico. And we share a 2,000-mile border. So what happens in Mexico is extremely important to the United States.
And, you know, the perception of drugs from developed nations such as Holland or Great Britain or the U.S. is that it is a public health issue, that it is an issue of the individual, of his personal decision of how he uses his time to recreate himself. And this may be so in developed nations, but in nations like Mexico, besides those issues, there are other very, very more profound issues that accompany the drug problem. And
well, like the fact, as you just mentioned, that it seems as though there's a state within a state. Are you actually on verge of perhaps what could be called a civil war?
Well, what I can tell you now is that it's a lot riskier for someone to be to become started in business as an entrepreneur than it is to start as a member of organized crime. You know, 80% of Mexican business startups fail within the first 2 years, and over 90% fail by the first decade. In contrast, we have a situation where only 5% of crimes are reported, and of those 5%, only 15 press charges. And of those 15%, only about one very unlucky criminal out of 100 actually goes to jail.
So you're saying it's easier and more profitable to be a criminal in Mexico than it is to be a business person?
It is a conundrum, but crime pays.
Well, you know, one thing that we saw recently was the death of the Interior Minister in a plane crash that crashed right in a street, a major thoroughfare in Mexico City, killed several people on the ground, including the Interior Minister and a security official on the plane. There was rumors about whether that was related to this drug violence you're talking about. Do you have any evidence that it is?
Well, we heard those rumors, and we looked at the evidence very, very closely. We analyzed the radar screens, and we analyzed the flight paths, and we talked to many expert pilots. And I must say that the evidence that we have available to us indicates that it was a very, very bad decision on the part of a pilot. Our indication is that it was a wake turbulence-related accident.
All right. And I should mention, by the way, Alejandro is an experienced pilot himself, so he knows what he's talking about. Finally, Alejandro, I got to say, you are, for those who don't know, one of the bravest journalists that I know in the entire world. What you have gone through in terms of fighting for the truth in your various newspapers. Are you concerned at all about your life as you fight this criminal element in Mexico?
Well, one very unfortunate aspect of this fight against drugs is that we have had to adjust many of our journalistic practices to be able to engage in this war in as smart a way as that we can. For example, we cannot run reporters as bylines in stories that we cover. You know, we have to alter their beats so that they're not exposed to the same sources. We have to change our routines to avoid kidnappers. And only recently, for the second time in 4 decades, I had to move my entire family out of the country.
And I remember the first time we met about 20 years ago, you had to do the same thing. So it's become kind of circular for you. But again, this situation is a crisis that Americans on both sides of the border have to be aware of and work on, particularly for the people of Mexico and the United States. Alejandro, always a pleasure to see you. Please come back to Scoreboard.
Thank you very much, David.
A great